All right, welcome everyone to today's economy update. Before we get started, I'm a little bit of a different face to Grace, as we all know. Before I get introduced to Stephen, I'll quickly explain why this has happened. So, all of the promotions have been the usual, just Grace and Stephen. Today, on late notice, just she's unable to make it. So now you've got what a lot of people refer to as the male version of Grace, i.e., her son. So I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or not, but here we are. So it's the economy update. I think we're up to week 30 now, week 39 now, if that's correct. Been going for a while now, and it's great to have you here, Stephen. So we all know here Stephen's the star of the show, so the show is going to continue one way or the other, and here we are ready for another economy update. Welcome to everyone on here. It's great to see a lot of familiar names, or can't really say faces today, so I'll say familiar names, but good to see you on here. Once again, good to see you on, Stephen, and looking forward to another interview with you.
Yeah, cool. It's great to be there, and it's good to have you on instead of your mum for a change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so feel free, guys, in the comment section to let me know how I go. Maybe don't criticize too much, because I'll probably laugh as we're going along. But before I get started, a funny story. I was kind of most people these days are kind of trying to work out how to filter themselves to make themselves look better on camera. But I was just before this trying to work out how to make myself not look filtered. So can't say I found an answer for that, but this is all natural. So even though it doesn't look it, but call me a beauty queen or something. That's just how it naturally looks on camera now. But
no need for filters, mate. No need for filters.
Yeah, I agree. So pretty much, anyway, we'll get started with it, Stephen. Week 39, once again, welcome to everyone. And we've got a few points that we want to cover today, Stephen, because we know there's, especially in 2022, there's never-ending news around the economy. So the first point that I wanted to ask you was around shortages, especially around houses. So the shortages around houses. So the stuff around housing costs and all that, do you think that's a natural trend, or is it government induced around the housing shortages and the costs of it?
No, most of it's government induced, and this is the problem that we've got is the government's trying to fix a problem that it actually brings about, and the problem with housing, especially with housing, is that you've got a state government and councils that are addicted to the revenue that comes from stamp duties, and taxes and all that sort of stuff on properties. And then you've got a federal government that is also hell-bent on environmental legislation and not wanting to approve new housing estates. So we could solve the housing crisis and the housing affordability pretty much overnight by the councils and the state governments and that getting out of the way. We've got plenty of land in this country. The reason we get houses that are flooded and stuff is because councils put them in areas that are flood zones instead of putting them in other areas. So, and this is the biggest problem we've got in this country with housing is it's not immigration, it's not any of that sort of stuff. It is literally how governments who are addicted to the revenue that comes from high prices, and banks make a lot of money. So I was talking to a developer friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and he said to me, he said, out of an $800,000 apartment that they build, about 175,000 of that is state government taxes, stamp duties, and all that sort of stuff, right? So then on top of that, you put the GST for the federal government, right? So that's, the governments are addicted to that revenue. So you could, if they didn't have all the, like stamp duty is not supposed to be in because of GST. Simple as that. So get rid of that. There's 3%, 4% that'll come off the price of a house straight away, right? But it's not going to happen because the state governments want the revenue. The other biggest problem that they've got out of that 800,000 as well is holding costs. There's another 10 to 12% of that $800,000 is bank fees and everything that they've got to pay to hold the property while they get it ready for development stage. It can take up to 2 years to get a development permit. So a developer's got to hold that. So all this adds to the crisis. Once again, governments are the problem, and people need to be made aware of this. Is that we don't have a housing shortage or a housing cost crisis. We've got a government bureaucracy crisis, and that's what needs to be addressed.
Is that just because governments are? Is that because you see governments just taking over the property market, and that's pretty much where it's been affected?
Well, there's that, but governments get addicted to revenue. So governments have a spending problem. Is they spend way more, and they keep making stupid promises. We're going to childcare for everyone and free this and free that. Well, that's got to be paid for. So they rip it out of people that are trying to buy their first home. Homes can be very affordable in this country if governments got out of the way, especially if governments got out of the way and made things quicker for developers to develop and open up more land. And this is where the councils come in. Councils restrict the land use through their town planning acts. So if councils got out of the road and open up more land, but then again, say it devalues the price, and Australia's hooked on property. So it can be done, but no one's going to do it. They're just going to keep blaming the poor immigrants and that are coming to this country. And, honestly, they're the only ones that are working at the moment, because most Australians won't.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, speaking of shortages in general, I mean, we all know housing, there's been a massive shortage on this. I know for myself I'm a bit younger than a lot of people, obviously, who are listening to this. So I know the idea of buying a first home these days is just not appealing at all. Like, why would you spend so much money in a house when it's just going to probably keep going up in interest rates? So I know what you mean. It's just ridiculous these days. So speaking of shortages, we all know there's quite a big labor shortage, and whether that's just because there's not enough workers or whether it's because there's not enough skilled people around because people are just getting lazy. But what are your kind of thoughts on that around the skill shortages with international workers, people finding jobs? Is that also government induced, or is that just a different society?
No, so it's definitely government induced again. We don't have a skill shortage. We're pretty much in our workforce in Australia. Everyone can always be upskilled, and a lot of that can be done on the job. But people think they've got to go to university for everything. Well, they don't. They basically take themselves out of the workforce for way too long. Get a degree or something that basically makes them an overpriced bartender, and then doesn't actually put the skills where they're fully needed. The COVID lockdown, locking down the international borders, scared most of our international people away. We told everyone to go home. So by doing that, we took millions of people. I think we took like 1.5 million people out of the economy by sending them all home. It's just ridiculous. And a lot of them are students who fill the positions in the hospitality sector, especially where the Australians are moving up the ladder. And now we've got a big vacuum where there's no students filling the gaps. We don't have fruit pickers anymore because we told them to go home. And there is people that move around the world and have holidays off the back of doing fruit picking, or off the back of working in hospitality on cruise ships and on yachts and in resorts and all that sort of stuff during the peak season. Take the snow season, for instance. So you have this migratory workforce that moves around the world, and they're not coming to Australia anymore because the government doesn't want them. I was told the other day that you can pretty much, if you're a student, say you're an Indian guy looking to go to a university somewhere, Canada will pretty much give you a student visa for $50. Australia's student visas are $500. So where are you going to go as a student? I'm going to go to Canada. I'm not going to come here, because, and Canada will pretty much give you a student visa straight away. It's going to take 4 months to get it processed or something for Australia. It's just stupid. So once again, government is the problem, and it just happens over and over, and and it's just ridiculous of where we're at in this world. So
it is almost laughable. So Like, what do you think is the reason governments are turning them away? Do you think it's just stupidity, or is there an actual logical reason behind it?
Stupidity. Most of it's stupidity. I think I was saying this last week. We got to the stage now where our governments are so entrenched in the ideological crap that the wokeisms and all this sort of stuff, especially in the bureaucracy. They think that their world is the real world, and so they get this massive group think, and they just keep going. So, like, have a look at the unions in New South Wales at the moment with the train strikes. They are just crippling the Sydney metropolitan area with transport by not wanting to drive a train because it had coke spilled in the carriage. Well, that's not a mechanical or a safety issue. That's a cleaner issue. Get the cleaner on board the cleaner. And this is the things that this country is now. It's just bogged down in stupidity and groupthink. And most politicians and that, they just read Twitter and think that that's the real world. And we all know that Twitter is definitely not the real world. And so that then leads us on to any movement that's out there creating stupid policies around themselves and fighting any idiotic, I don't know, any idiotic cause. And then they forget about what the real cause was that they were really fighting for. If you have a look at Greenpeace is quite an interesting example of this. The founders of Greenpeace walked away from Greenpeace because they said that Greenpeace no longer represents the movement that they established. They got kicked off the board because they weren't government orientated enough. The founder of Sea Shepherd, Paul Watson, has just stepped down from the board of Sea Shepherd, especially I think it's Sea Shepherd US that he stepped down from, because he just wants to go and do what he's always done. But the movement, all they want to do is workshops and government lobbying. So he's got rid of. So this is what happens with all these movements, is they tend to drift away into what they think is green, in group think, and our governments work the same way, and there's no real connection with what's going on in society. So which is
I agree. I mean, do you have any anticipations or time limit when you think governments will kind of change the way that international work is being treated, or there's probably always a bit hard to put a limit on that?
Look, I would hope by the next election they will wake up to themselves. The problem Labor have is Labor are driven because 50% of their voting power is the union movement. So Labor's driven by the union movement. The problem with the union movement is they represent 8% of the working population in Australia. 8%. That's it.
Yeah.
But they've got 50% power in the governing parliament, government, in the governing party in Parliament. So you've got 8% of the population, and out of that 8%, there's probably another 50% of those that are only members because if they're not members, they can't get a job. So all of a sudden, you've got a party governed by a very small minority of people outside who are trying to protect their own self-interest. And it goes for the Liberal Party as well. The Liberal Party now are governed by the inner city intellectuals who think that the woke cause and the teal cause is the way that the party should go, rather than looking after its traditional roots. And it's only going to get worse. Excuse me. It's only going to get worse before it gets better. But strap in, because it's going to be a very interesting ride. So
yeah, no, I think everyone's kind of buckling up for that ride. So, I mean, while we're on the topic of Parliament and Labor, One point that we were going to go through today was around Albo and Morrison, like the witch hunt on him and just the control over
Yeah,
the parliament and losing sight and all that. So could you share a little bit on Albo losing sight and controlling the parliament as well as the witch hunt on Morrison?
yeah. So and look, I'm not going to defend Morrison here because what Morrison did was legal, and both parties have done this, mind you. Albo getting on his grandstanding and all that sort of stuff only has to look back in his own past, and it normally only happens very short term when a new government's formed, that you end up with the Prime Minister and then the new minister both holding the portfolios at the same time, and then the Prime Minister hands it over. So Albo can't jump up and down because they all do it. But what was wrong what Morrison did, in my view, is not tell his cabinet. He didn't have to tell the Australian people because he doesn't have to. It's just 100% he doesn't have to tell the Australian people. That's all bullshit. If we want a true democracy, well, we wouldn't have a cabinet in the first place because the people would vote on every bit of legislation, which would be a good thing because we would hardly have any legislation change. So, Switzerland is really, I think Switzerland's about the only true democracy in the world, is where citizens get to vote on everything major. Everyone else is pretty much just a republic of some form where you vote people in to look after your representation, and that's wrong. It's but so Morrison now is going to be hung out to dry, especially by Albo in the opposition, and Albo hasn't changed from an opposition leader to a prime minister, and his whole government hasn't changed from opposition to government. They still think that they've got to go after those on the other side to try and destroy their character and all that. Hang on, he won. Move on from that. And this is where everything Albo is doing is because they don't have a plan. They don't have any policies that other than the crap ones that they've put up so far. They've basically probably run out of their agenda, where we're at. And so Albo now is going on a witch hunt to get Morrison because he's got to fill the void with something. The other problem is while he still acts like an opposition leader and he doesn't act like a prime minister and a government, is he's going to lose control of parliament, because what will happen is the opposition and the crossbench can actually dictate how parliament operates. And we have seen this quite a few times. We saw this under Tony Abbott, when Tony Abbott first got elected and he couldn't distinguish between being an opposition leader and a prime minister, and then all of a sudden he grew out of it. And then he went really weird. But he lost the control of parliament in the first few months and nearly didn't get it back, but he did. Albo's in the same boat, and the whole Labor Party's in the same boat, where they could lose everything to the Teals and the Greens and everyone that we don't want, because they will then drive the agenda and they'll drive really, really the wrong way. So we're in a really precarious place in Parliament at the moment, especially federally, and we'll see what happens. Can he turn it around? Maybe. It'll depend on how strong the union movement is, because a lot of his agenda has been driven by the union movement, and it'll be also driven. It's also been driven by special interests. The Aboriginal voice thing is by special interest. It's about all those that want to create massive amounts of money for themselves. And just something interesting on the Aboriginal question is, you may hear a lot about people, and the current Indigenous minister has already perpetuated these myths, is that the biggest one is Aboriginal people weren't citizens until 1967 referendum. Well, that's actually incorrect. Everyone who resided in Australia in a colony in 1930 were made made citizens under the Citizenship Act back then. And I think even in some states, Aboriginals and immigrants were made citizens at the time that the state joined the Commonwealth in 1901. Menzies in 40, I think it was 44, when he redid the Citizenship Act, made everyone a citizen. Didn't matter which state you were in, and that included Aboriginals. So there is proof that Aboriginals were voting in 1930s and 1940s in the election back there. So that's a myth that is just crap. It never, ever, ever happened. It was voting. Pretty much the right to vote wasn't bestowed on all Aboriginals. And then there was a couple other things. But that putting him in the 67 referendum was making sure that the right to vote couldn't be taken off them more than bestowed on them. So, yeah. So it's a bit of a furphy, all the stuff that gets perpetuated around the Aboriginal people. And it's a shame because the people that should know this stuff are the ones that are responsible for looking after them in our parliament. And they're Aboriginal themselves. So you can just tell it's all about, what's in it for me, my self-interest.
Well, it's pretty much the common story, just ignorance. A lot of people just ignore the facts and don't really bother looking for the actual facts behind situations. So kind of going back to the Albo situation, because I had two questions of my own following from that, is that one of the questions was, like, could you quickly summarize the difference between an opposition leader versus a prime minister, just so we can get an understanding of that? And then once you've done that, the second part is what would that actually practically look like if Albo did lose control over the parliament for Australia, and just your everyday business owner or investor? Would there be any impact on that if they did lose control over it, or not really?
Yeah, okay. So starting on the first one, the Prime Minister is responsible for, it's actually responsible to the monarchy through the Governor-General for the operation of Australia, right? So they actually have the power to be able to implement through the practices of the Parliament how the country's governed. An opposition leader is there, it's in the title, opposition. You're there to oppose in a constructive manner the government of the day to make sure that you get the right outcome for the people. And normally opposition leaders and opposition ministers, their primary role is I suppose criticise it, but it's not the right word, is to create checks and balances about their counterpart in government. So the opposition leader is to question the Prime Minister. And a proper question time that we have in Parliament now is so scripted, it's crap. The only people that actually ask proper questions are the crossbench, One Nation and the Greens and all those that don't have any skin in the game. Everyone else just asks what we call Dorothy Dixes, or questions that their minister or the opposition minister can answer to get them into into the Gazette and into the media that night. So that's the difference between the opposition. And Albo's still playing that opposition because he keeps criticising and questioning Morrison as if Morrison was the Prime Minister. Morrison lost government because the people could smell a rat, right? Yeah. So he lost government. And that's the biggest thing that can happen. So really what Anthony Albanese should do is go, okay, that's what he did was not right, morally, legally, it was perfect. The Governor-General signed off on it, so that's the Queen's representative. He should have told Cabinet. So what I'm going to do is put in place inside the Cabinet documents. I still don't believe that he has to tell the Australian people because we don't have a democracy, so he's only got to tell his Cabinet. And he should have told Cabinet that I'm holding this position for this reason. If anyone's got problems with it, let's sort it out. And I think what Albo will do is change the rules around how Cabinet works for that to happen. if he does, he does. Let's see. Now on to your second question. Is there anything major going to happen if he loses control of Parliament? Not really. What we could end up with, though, is slightly worse social programs than what we've got now. Because what will happen is the Greens will team up with Labor. The Teals will team up with Labor to really try and force their agenda. And their agenda is to get to like 70% renewables. Everyone's to drive an electric car tomorrow, which can't happen. So we'll see that sort of stuff if he loses control, obviously. What could also happen is we could start seeing the knives come out from people wanting his job. Now, we do know that for him to lose his job, it is going to be a very, very, very uphill battle because of the process that they've got to go through to change their leader. So, but watch this space. It could be good fun and games. It's not really going to change too much what's happening out there. Everything that they're doing is more symbolic than it is actually going to hurt anything at this stage. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it will be interesting to see how that plays out. I know all of us will be keeping a close eye on it. If you told me like 3 years ago or something that we'd be here discussing politics and just keeping an eye on it in general, then I'd just be thinking you're crazy, because who genuine, like, not many people, young people, just people in general enjoy listening to politics. But in this world, I think it's a necessity to learn about politics and what's going on. So
100%. Politics controls everything, mate. And people have really got to understand that, is that you need to have a strong interest in politics so you can control how you vote, so we don't end up with the mess that we've got now. And this is why politics is not taught in schools anymore, is because if people really understood how politics works and the actual strength that the citizens can have over politicians, if done right, you wouldn't have the idiot politicians you got now.
Well, yeah, exactly. I'm sure they're well aware that they wouldn't be in the position they are if people were smart enough to realize what power they had. So it's pretty straightforward why you'd take it out of schools and all that.
Yeah.
While we're on the topic of politics and talking about the Greens and all that, could you share a little bit about their movement that's going on at full tilt, as we would say, just around renewables, around trees and all that?
Yeah. So the whole green movement is starting to. I think I brought this up probably 2 months ago. But the whole green movement has lost sight of what the green movement was about. And the green movement now is so entrenched on renewables that they forgot about, well, we were first about protecting farmland and protecting pastures and protecting forests and protecting birds and insects and that. So by the green movement going full on renewables, what they're also doing is saying it's okay to destroy forests. Because if you have a look around the world, and it's happening here in Australia, solar farms, there's more land being cleared by solar farm developers than there is by farmers. Huge amounts of land, right? And they're just getting it done. Developers aren't clearing as much land, for housing as solar farms, right? And we're putting solar farms on very good grazing land as well, because they've got to be flat and in areas close to cities and all this sort of stuff. So the whole green movement has just totally lost sight on what it was designed for. Windmills, for instance, are killing absolutely massive amounts of big predatory birds. So the turbines kill bats because of their noise, but just because the blades are slow moving, they also kill osprey and albatross and big eagles because they don't see the what do you call it, the blade coming, and they get hit by it. So it's just ridiculous that they go on about that. And the other one is nuclear power. So if you want the cleanest, cheapest, most dense form of energy you can find that doesn't destroy the environment, you would go nuclear all day, every day. There is nothing out there better than nuclear. And look, you don't have to use uranium, you can use thorium. They've already got thorium reactors, which is a radioactive element very similar to uranium, but if thorium can't be turned into a nuclear weapon. So, and these things are out there today, right? Running now all over the place. China, Russia, India are building them everywhere. Small modular nuclear reactors everywhere. Now, I think Russia's got them on big floating barges so they can move around. So China's building some as well. Now, the green movement, especially in this country, it is changing in some other parts. The green movement, as soon as you mention nuclear, they just, no. And that just, they won't put the solution on the table for what they're trying, because then what happens is all of a sudden their cause goes away. And their cause creates a lot of money for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that's why the green movement is, it's conflicted. You're starting to see a lot of some of the original green movements in places like Finland and Sweden, and that say that nuclear is the way to go and renewables aren't. The biggest problem that we've got with renewables is they only last, people say 20 years. I haven't seen one yet that lasts that long, and still produce it at the proper capacity. About 12 years is the maximum before they start to come off the curve. We can't recycle solar panels properly in mass. We can do it on small scale. We can't recycle the turbines. The turbines are filled with gas that is very toxic to the environment. So when they leak the gas out, it's actually worse than natural gas leaking out of a well. When they catch fire, they're more toxic than anything. So you've got these people that are pushing a massive agenda when they won't even consider the actual alternative, which is the best one, which is nuclear, or just stay with coal and gas and put scrubbers and CO2. If you reckon that's the problem, just put scrubbers on. So the beverage industry, the carbonated beverage industry, has a lack of CO2.
Yeah.
Right. So they're growing at such a rate that they have a lack of CO2. So industry will use the CO2. We can produce ammonia. We need CO2 to produce ammonia, and ammonia is fertilizer. So we just got to get smarter about how we do stuff.
So what do you think would be the reason that they're choosing renewables rather than everything else, though, like nuclear, coal and all that?
Because of where their money's coming from to boost. So if you have a look here in Australia, the Teal movement, for instance, was backed by Simon Holmes à Court. Where's all his money invested? Renewable energy. Mike Cannon-Brookes with AGL, who heavily invests in the Greens and the Teals and all the and the left parties. Where's most of his money invested? In renewable energy. Where are the Bloombergs and all that invested a lot of their money? BlackRock, into renewable energy. But if you have a look at a lot of these guys as well, they're also heavily invested in fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Because one drives the other. We've got coal at the moment at the highest it's ever been, and we're pushing more and more of it out through our coal mines than we've ever done, because Europe is desperate for coal.
Yeah.
Russia keeps turning gas, so they're desperate for coal to power, to keep the lights on and to keep the heat going. Europe's going into winter, and it's going to be a very bad winter up there. Yeah.
So pretty much they're just following. They're basically just following key figures then who are investing in them, just following that trend. Yeah.
And they just go where the money pushes them, and because most of them don't have a unique idea in their head. If you actually sit down with half of these people that go on about all the crap, and super glue themselves to roads and all that sort of stuff, when you actually sit down and try and have a conversation with you, all they do is yell at you. They just yell lines back at you. They can't have a conversation and tell you why. They just can't, because they're brainwashed to such a degree that their only response is to yell.
Yeah. So, I mean, on that topic of renewables, Don, there's a question from Don and Rose asking, do you see us getting smart in what we do so these tides of change turn more towards the right direction for renewable, sustainable living?
Yeah, I do. But it's going to be done at a more community-based level. And the way that we use the resources that we've got in the world. So, for instance, one of the things that I was on a conference call with a whole heap of mining guys earlier today, and one of the biggest problems that we've got in the world is the known amount of lithium is only about probably 55 to 60% of the projected amount of lithium needed to electrify all vehicles. Right. So the physical amount that they know of in the world only caters for 60%, I'll be generous at 60%, of the total amount needed to electrify all vehicles. Now, that's just all vehicles. That's not battery storage for your house. That's not batteries for your phone. That's not batteries for your remote control. That's not batteries for anything else, your computer and that's all going lithium. So we just don't have enough lithium on the planet. Known amounts of lithium. That doesn't mean it's not there. It's just not discovered yet. They'll probably discover more. Now, we also don't have enough cobalt. We don't have enough rhodium. We don't have enough iridium. We don't have enough of all these other rare earth metals that currently go into make batteries, integrated circuits or IC chips, and all this other parts of the electronics chain to electrify our need. So we're going to have to come up with other sources and other ways of doing it. So that means we're going to have to use our resources in a better way. Now, I'm in the coal, oil, gas industry. I'm invested in that industry. I believe that we will use those resources at a higher level in the value chain, because at the moment we pretty much use, especially oil, for a very low product, which is gasoline, fuel for your car, diesel, gasoline, super low on the chemistry chain. We should be using it more, and if we don't do this, take all the synthetic fibers out of your life. You'd be walking around naked for a start. There's not enough cotton grown on the planet to clothe everyone. That's why we use so much synthetic fibers. You wouldn't have a phone, you wouldn't have Wi-Fi, you wouldn't have anything, because we don't have the petrochemical component which is needed to create plastics. Right? Yes, we can create plastics from corn and all that sort of stuff, but nowhere near in the quantity that petrochemical. So that's where I see is the petrochemical chain will be used in a different part of the stack. I like the idea of electrification of machinery, because it reduces the mechanical wear and tear and the cost to maintain. If you put an electric motor in the place of a steam engine, it's heaps. You got one spinning part versus 1,000 spinning parts. So it's easier to maintain, easier to look after. The life is normally longer. It's normally quieter. It's normally just better. So electrification is going to happen, purely and simply because people will wake up and go, holy shit, it's going to save me a shitload of money. Simple as that.
Yeah.
So yes, we're going to have to work. Now, I also think we're going to stop living in McMansions. that's one of the reasons I'm investing into the tiny home movement. Is I think what could happen, and if you take a lot of me and a lot of my friends, is we're nomadic in nature, right? Tonight I'm in a hotel room. Tomorrow night I'm in a hotel room. Right the way through until Saturday, I'm living out of hotel rooms. Going into next week, I'll be in a house probably 2 nights. So out of the next 2 weeks, I'm probably going to spend 3 nights out of 14 in a house that I won't be spending somewhere else. I don't need a big house. So I think we're going to go to more of tiny communities. And as I said, I'm investing in that. I'll put my hand up to say I'm investing in that. And I'm actually, that's part of the reason I'm in Melbourne is we're looking to build a tiny home community that has its own gardens and its own chickens and its own cafe and its own co-working space, fully off the grid, fully that's not connected, to actually test this theory. I'm putting my money and my investors' money where our mouths are to actually go and test this theory. And I believe we will live smaller, which means we reduce the amount of energy. We can live more sustainably. Now, sustainably doesn't mean that you have to be vegan and all this sort of crap and go too far. It just means that you're looking after yourself and your community a lot, like we used to do. And that is something that we don't do today. Most people don't know their neighbours.
Well, I think it wouldn't be a surprise if that happened. Like you said, you can see it happening there, and I think we all kind of can, because it's not only just the community aspect, but also just the whole cost of living. I mean, why? And just logically, if the cost of living is going up to buy a massive house, then obviously you're going to have to find an alternative. And if there's tiny homes, then that's certainly one way to do it.
Yeah, well, a cousin of mine, him and his partner, they've got 3 tiny homes around the world. They sold their big house in Sydney, right? They went and bought 3 tiny homes around the world. Meanwhile, their tiny homes aren't mobile tiny homes like what we're looking at. They're just smaller homes on small lots inside communities. They've got one here in Australia, one in Canada, and they're looking at one in Italy at the moment. They're renting one over there, but they're about to buy one. And they spend their time just moving around between each one. They spend the summer here and winter there, and they go where family and friends are. So people are thinking differently, and they're not the only ones. And I think we are going to change the way that we work, and we are going to get smarter in how we use land as well. And I think councils will have to bite the bullet and change the way that they zone land, or otherwise people are just going to ignore them and start doing it themselves. Because as I said, out of an apartment of 800 grand, 200 grand of it goes to the government. Why would you do that? Because that 200 grand, I can build 2 tiny homes.
Yeah.
2 tiny, fully off-grid homes, and be basically debt-free. Because if you've got to put up a 20% or 25% deposit, that's nearly your 200 grand. So why wouldn't you spend that on a tiny property where you get to live in one and rent one and create an income?
Speaking of that, Aiden asks, is this a solution to the land shortage? I'm assuming the answer is yes, but what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, 100%. This is a massive, massive, massive thing. And it could actually get to the stage where we could subvert governments by just ignoring their planning rules, and people putting these in the backyards and opening up to, like say you got a farmer with, 100 acres. Go and put 3 or 4 of them on the property. No one's going to know. Fully off grid, the farmer gets some rent. The people get a place to stay. Better utilisation of land. You might even find that the people that are working, living in the tiny homes, end up helping out the farmer a bit, and get to know nature and get to know this. So we end up with a win-win-win.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, just to keep it moving, that pretty much wraps up the Australian side of the economy. So we can move to the global update. But just before we do that, I know there's quite a few people who showed up a bit later. So just to give you guys the heads up why I'm here instead of Grace. No, she didn't have a sex change. I'm just for everyone who showed up late. This is Ed. I'm her, as I said at the start, the male version of her, as a lot of people put it. So that's pretty much why I'm here, is because she couldn't make it on late notice. So we just decided to go ahead like this, and hopefully it's panning out well. And Stephen's the star of the show, so I'm enjoying this. And so now we'll go on to the global update, Stephen. So there's a few points that we're going to discuss today, and the first one, just taking them through one by one, is around the globalists pushing their agenda. So could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, so the globalists are still running full steam ahead with their agenda. It's starting to wear thin on people out in the ground. One of the things that I find really interesting is the network, like the TV networks and the media networks that are really pushing the globalist agenda are losing their ratings. So they're actually scrambling now because they're sacking people that are the largest supporters of this on the channel to try and get a more balanced thing. I think CNN recently sacked about 5 anchors from its channel, and they were the ones that were really pushing the globalist bullshit, and half of them were, WEC young leaders. But they've replaced them with similar-minded people, but not as, big drum beaters. So they're really still trying to push their agenda. People are starting to wake up. We're starting to see a lot more protests and all that sort of stuff. But the biggest thing is, and we know that the movement is slowly starting to break down, and that is that look at what they do, not what they say. And the biggest thing here is the EU. So the EU keeps talking about, we've got to go renewable, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. We need a one world government, everyone needs a digital ID, this, that, and the other. And then you actually have a look, every time they bring that to one of their parliaments, it gets voted down. And it gets voted down because more people from the party pushing it are voting against it. Because obviously they're sick and tired of having eggs thrown at their windows or death threats or whatever it is, because the people are getting sick and tired of it. So it's slowly happening that they mouth it to keep, their backers and their financiers happy, but in the parliaments, they're quietly not doing it. Germany, for instance, went so far down the renewables route that now they're clamouring for coal power, and whatever gas that they can get, because they just can't keep the lights on. The Netherlands went heavily into the fart taxing, of the dairy farmers. Now they're slowly, that was a mistake. Oh, no, sorry. It was all misinterpreted and that. So they're backing out of it, but their leaders are still mouthing it. And so just watch what they do, especially Europe. Europe will do, so, and I think I've mentioned this before, I was told from someone I know over there in the EU that the boss that they work for, who's fairly high up, said that the EU will never fully implement everything that it's pushing on everyone else, because they know that they can't do it. They know that they'll end up with a pitchfork rebellion. Yeah. So they are going to push other people to do it and destroy their economies. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. There's a whole heap of them around the world that are going to UK if it keeps going the way it's going. And it will be the EU that will just basically renege on Paris agreements and all that sort of stuff. So watch what they do, not what they say. And it's always been that way. Watch what a politician does, not what he says. the other big one around that is this Biden inflation bill that he's got through, which is just the watered down Build Back Better bill. They kept saying that it's all about, we're going to tax the rich, we're going to harm the 1%. There's nothing in that bill that will harm the 1%. Not a thing. Everything that's in that bill will harm the mum and dad with a small business. If you have an LLC, if you're a mum and dad small business with an LLC in the US, expect an audit and expect your taxes to go up, because it's a pass-through taxing entity. So those who are members and have heard me talk about understand how to use entities properly, this is one of them. An LLC is a pass-through tax entity, and the government knows it, which means that you are paying the tax for your company. Now, you can structure an LLC so it's taxed as a company in a proper way, and you'll limit your taxes, but most people don't, because their accountants and all that basically work for the government and tell them to structure this way because I'll get you a better deal. You don't. You always end up worse. Right. And I was having this conversation with one of my CEOs today. I said, it's a good thing that we've got a tax problem this year, because one, it means we made money, and two, now we can plug some holes, right, and put the government's own rules into place to reduce our tax bill and keep that money flowing around the company and ultimately give it back to shareholders. So having a tax problem is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, right? If you only ever want to save tax, I can do that. I can save tax all day, every day using the current rules. You've just got to understand how entities work and how you can play the system that the government puts in place for the big end of town, right? That's why most of the big end of town, you hear about all the big miners and the big corporates not paying tax. It's because they're using the legal loopholes that the government put in place. It's always the small person who thinks small and doesn't look at how the big end of town are doing it, because you can apply the same principles, right, and then go ahead and save yourself a huge amount of tax. You know, the IRS putting on 87,000 new agents, that part of their training is to be able to kill someone. Since when did a tax agent need to be able to kill someone?
Yeah.
That just goes to show you that they're basically turning them into the Stasi of East Germany. You know, make sure you're dobbing on your neighbour. So that's what all this stuff is about. All these bills are about, you know, getting at the small people. And that's what I say, watch what they do, not what they talk about. And pretty much if a politician is sprouting one thing, they're doing the opposite. And that's they're personally doing the opposite.
Yeah.
You know? So if they tell you that overseas companies are bad, have a look, because I bet you their family are doing it.
Yeah. Well, and that's pretty much like you said, is that there's always going to be loopholes, even if they say that it's targeting the super wealthy, because we all know that they're going to put in loopholes for themselves and for their own corporations. So it's just a matter of finding that.
100%. It's all about fighting that.
So Donna Rose asks a question, is how can I learn more about a small business company structure / entity here in Australia?
So what was that one? Sorry, let me...
So Donna Rose asks, how can I learn more about a small business company structure or entity here in Australia?
Well, I think we've got videos on it.
Yeah, we do have a bunch of videos. Like if you go on our membership site on our website, globalwealthclub.com, there's for specifically Australia, like you mentioned, there's videos on trusts and companies and all that just in the free training section. So yeah, if you just go to, I haven't got the link, but if one of the team could put the link, just globalwealthclub.com/free training, I think it is. We do have quite a few videos on Australian structures like foundations, trusts and companies, and stuff like that. So that's the best place to start, at least.
That is it. The other place to start is actually read the news articles that talk about someone who was done, and this is, I do this all the time, is this person was supposed to have got done for tax evasion. the media will go, oh, he's done by tax evasion. And then when you read the article, he wasn't. Well, just read what they actually say in the article, what they did, and then go and have a look and see how you can do it. Because 9 times out of 10, what the media report is tax evasion, and that is just tax minimisation. And as the good old Kerry Packer said, if you're not minimising your tax, you want your head read, because the government isn't spending it wisely enough. That we should be donating extra to them. So I actually reckon, and now I can't remember where it is, but somewhere in the tax code, it actually says that it's the citizen's right to minimise their tax. Now, I can't remember if that's in ours or the IRS one, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. Warren and I had this whole conversation once, and it's actually written there in black and white that it says, basically, that says you should be minimising your tax.
Well, I mean, I think that's probably one of my favorite quotes, which for anyone who has listened to my dad, he pretty much quotes that a lot in most of his seminars on tax minimization. It's you can hear it 1,000 times, but it never gets old. Why would you be paying extra?
Yeah, 100%. It's just, it's maddening. And the Australian tax rules, man, you can drive a lorry through half of them. There is so much to do, and this is what I keep saying to a lot of people that I teach and work with, is if you master the art of an entity, right, and we're talking about corporations here, and if you master the art of a corporation, man, you can save yourself a fortune. So a corporation's tax rate, right, is 25. I think it's 25% at the moment. For small businesses, so most people end it. At the worst case, it's 30%. So and that's 30% on after you've spent all your money, right? After you spent. Okay, you've got to be careful of professional services, income rules, and all that sort of stuff. But there's heaps of ways around it. Heaps of ways around it. And you can actually basically, because here it is. An individual earns his money, pays tax, spends, pays tax, spends and pays tax, right? So every time you spend, you pay tax, you pay GST, right? You get taxed on your income, through income tax, and then you get taxed every time you spend your money with a GST. So you're getting double taxed all the time. Now, you know how a company gets taxed? It earns its income, it pays GST, but it claims the GST back, so it's GST neutral pretty much all the time. It then spends, claims deductions, does this, does that, transfer pricing, all this sort of stuff, and then pays tax on what's left. Now, if you're a doctor or something and you're putting your money, or a lawyer putting your money straight through in your own name, you're earning 250 grand a year, 200 grand a year, well, you're automatically paying tax on all that. Now, if that's through a company, right, I'll guarantee you should only be paying tax on at most 25, 30 grand, at most. And then if you're structured right, you can send that tax-free dividend to a foundation that you own, because you've already paid tax on it. So the trust or foundation that you're owning your name is not going to pay tax on that money again. So, you've just got to learn the art of how the wealthy really manage everything, and they don't manage it in their personal name. That's what the rich do, not the wealthy. And there is a difference between rich and wealthy.
Yeah. I remember something Robert Kiyosaki said as well, is that we can call it like the poorer people who own stuff in their own name and all that, just they always pay others, including taxes, before themselves. They pay themselves last, whereas the rich pay themselves first all the time, and then taxes come last once everything else is paid off.
100%.
Yeah. So pretty much the next point I wanted to go to, Stephen, was just in the financial markets in a chaos cycle. How are you kind of seeing that going, and like the opportunities? Is it a good time to, obviously we're not giving advice, but in your eyes, is it a good time to invest? Is there opportunities out there, or is it all just chaotic?
No, so the markets are in a chaos cycle. They're up and down, left and right, all over the place, and we're seeing that globally. The market was off today. It went down, and when it goes down up. But there is bright shoots inside all that. Take resources, for instance. A lot of the coal companies are up through the roof. We've got a takeover of a zombie coal company out there at the moment at a 60% premium to its share price. It absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. There is zombie oil companies that have increased 40, 50% in share price, and they do nothing just because they hold oil reserves. So
Yeah.
there is opportunities out there. There is companies that are out there making good profits. We're starting to see the takeover boom starting to happen again, and that's the space that I'm really excited about. Is the ability to start taking companies over and start merging companies together, because that's where a lot of money is going to be made. I'm thinking where the 1980s Gordon Gekko greed is good era is coming back, but it'll be shrouded in ESG and social responsibility. But watch this space. We're going to start seeing some interesting things. Woodside BHP. Woodside taking BHP's coal and oil and gas assets, for instance, all that sort of stuff. There's going to be some really interesting manoeuvres happen, and people can make a lot. Just pretty much tune out of the market commentary, because most of the commentators are wrong. I'm not a trader by any stretch of the imagination. I'm the worst stock trader in the world. I employ people to do that, and I partner with people to do that. But what I am good at is watching how companies are built and what you can do with other companies and how you can merge them together. So I'm good at the top end, and then I work with people that tell me what price and everything that I should be paying for it. So
yeah. And yeah, it's definitely something we're looking at doing, is just educating more around this topic about spotting investment opportunities and creating incomes from it. So we actually are, for everyone listening on here, we are looking at doing an event on that sometime later this year. So just put a comment in the chat if that would interest you. Just something around investing, spotting opportunities in these times, because we all know it's a chaotic market. So it's crucial to start creating incomes from that. So we are looking at doing something around that. So there's a couple points that we haven't covered yet, Stephen, just two. So how do you feel about going through those next week? And just so then we have time at this end here to go through anyone's questions that's listening here. Because
we can do that.
I've got one question here, which was from Vic at the start. I just didn't cover it because I wanted to save it till the end. So if anyone does have questions, just put it in the Q&A box rather than doing the chat, just so it's all in the same place and easy to read. So just put in the Q&A box. But Vic has a question just saying there's a lot of commentators saying the USD will collapse, property will drop, and the economy, and will the economy be this bad, or is it more hype? Also, if the above occurs, it appears that it would be best to wait for the economy to drop before buying shares.
Yeah, so good question, Vic. Now, yeah, there is a lot of commentators out there saying that the US dollar is going to drop and all this sort of stuff. Look, it will eventually, but not in the near term. There's nothing to take its place. The US dollar is going to be the world's financial currency for trade and everything for quite a while. Even though we keep talking about the shift to Asia, that's 2030, 2032. That's 10 years away. So the US dollar will keep going along its merry path as the world's reserve currency. Property will go up and down. Property goes up and down all the time. So one of the biggest property investors, Sam Zell, he basically says, if you buy a property, never sell it. You'll never make a loss if you don't sell. As long as it's got cash flow and it's covering its costs, why sell Just keep building assets, building assets, building assets. So, yeah, property go up and down. The biggest reason that we end up with cycles is because, and when I say cycles, real chaotic markets, is because of two things. One, unsophisticated mum and dad investors panic. They listen to the taxi driver. They listen to their friend next door. They listen to, the media and get panicked, and then they sell at stupid times. The other thing is the financial markets are the biggest manipulated market in the free world. The amount of robo trading, the amount of underhanded dealing, the amount of inside knowledge that the normal investor is not privy to is huge. If you took the insider knowledge out of the markets, you wouldn't have a market, because prices would never go anywhere. We call it insightful trading, because everyone, especially in the game, they hear stuff on the street, they hear rumours, and the normal mum and dad can't be connected to that. It's a rigged game for a mum and dad. So you really need to disconnect and not panic in a situation like this. It's just ride out the storm. Be diversified enough that you're still getting income from different streams, and just ride out the storm. And take opportunities when you see them. That's the other thing. A lot of people don't take opportunities when they're in front of them. They procrastinate on it and don't do anything. So that is probably the biggest thing on the US dollar. What was it? There was another part to Vic's question.
That was, let me have a look.
Drop before buying shares. Vic, as I said, I'm not a trader, so I don't know when the top or the bottom is. As I said, I've got other people that do that for me. Do I think the market can slide some more? Highly probable. The one thing that I was told when COVID hit and oil, everyone said, panicked when oil went to negative pricing. You couldn't buy oil at negative price because it was just a computer. It was paper trades. I said that within 12 months, oil will be back higher than what it was 12 months previous. That's true. I said the same thing with the market. In 12, 18 months' time, I said the market being higher than what it was pre-COVID. So there's still a lot of money being pumped into the market. The unsophisticateds will lose their money. The one thing you have to remember with the stock market is it's a zero-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game. If you're selling at a loss, someone's making a profit. And the brokers in the middle are always making money. So always remember that brokers in the middle and the middlemen always make money in the stock market. That's why it's rigged, because you're always going to lose that percentage on the way through. So, and if the more you panic, there's more someone with inside information going to buy up your shares.
Yeah. And the last question that I had from Suzanne, which was a bit earlier, going back to when we were discussing about the renewables and the Green Party, was that all these small batteries that have, I think I'm pronouncing it correct, lithium, will be obsolete when lithium runs out. How long before this happens?
Oh, look, it's going to be 50, 60 years. It is going to be a long time. But you've got to remember that the transition that we're going through is going to be a 50-year transition. All this stuff about, by 2035 and all this sort of stuff, it can't happen. We can't manufacture enough cars and batteries to do everything in that short a time frame. It just can't happen. So there is going to be a transition. A lot of what will also happen in that transition period, pretty much in the next, I would say 10 years, we'll start seeing some very, very smart recycling technology for lithium. There is some out there now, but it's 40% efficient. We'll see like 99% efficient recycling, and then that will prolong the life of lithium. Same as we have, so steel is the most recycled metal on Earth at the moment, and that's pretty much prolonged the life of the whole steel industry by hundreds of years. So we will get better at stuff. It's just that we need to transition. All this talk about it's going to happen in 10, 15 years between now and, or 25 years, between now and 2040, 2050, it just can't happen. We physically can't produce everything in that quicker time frame.
Yeah, actually, we've got one more question come through from Aidan. So to what extent have new discoveries and new technologies been factored in?
So the minerals resource guys have factored in quite a bit. You got to remember, most of the planet has been geo-surveyed. Most of the planet has been geo-surveyed. And the other thing here, this is why oil and gas will never run out, is because when it was first discovered, it was discovered in Pennsylvania in the US, and at that stage, it was the late 1700s, so they didn't know it existed in Texas and in California. So all of a sudden, it was discovered over there, then they discovered it in South America, they discovered it in Canada, they discovered it where it's mainly been discovered is on land, 30% of the planet, right? That's all that is. 70% of the world is ocean, and about 5% of the world's oceans, in the shallow part of the oceans, right? Now, there is going to be parts of the ocean where it's not going to be, but there's parts of the ocean where everything's going to be. We're already finding now on the side of underwater volcanoes, there is every metal, especially rare earth metals, known to man. They're all sitting there bubbling away as they used to when they first found them, like iron ore in the Kimberley. It was just on the surface. You go in with a shovel and literally start mining with a shovel. The man's only really surveyed 40% of the planet. So we've got 60% left. And if you take out of that 40%, about a third of it has nothing. It's just geologically too young. And doesn't have it, it's not part of the fissures, and geologists can tell you how it works. So if you take out of that 40%, a third of it's not. So what's a third of that is 27%, 28%, say 30% for round numbers. So if you apply the same theory to the oceans, we've probably got another 40% of the ocean to go and find more stuff. So everything that is known to man today is probably still yet to be found in the oceans. Just that we don't have, as of today, we don't have the full technology, but it's going fast. We've got undersea mining activities happening off Tonga. We've got them happening off Papua New Guinea. A lot of people have made a lot of money and lost a lot of money in all this. And we haven't even looked at the polar caps, purely and simply because it's just too hard. So that's Arctic and Antarctica. We haven't looked at some of the shallower waters in the middle of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, because the ocean's not like a basin that just goes down and gets deep. There is places in the middle of these oceans where it's actually fairly shallow. There's like little continental shelves out there. There mightn't be any islands, but the ocean is literally just shallow. So those areas haven't even been looked at yet. And there's a lot of satellite and planes flying around. My aviation business at the moment has some survey work going where we're doing big mag surveys over big swaths of the ocean that's close to the Australian coastline, looking for stuff that the geologists think, oh, well, there might be something there or there might not be. So.
Yeah. Well, that was a good in-depth answer to that question. So really good to hear. Yeah, we don't have any more questions. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up, everyone. I know we went a bit over now with 1 hour and 15 minutes to be exact, but I think we can all agree that listening to this type of knowledge and update is all worthwhile. And I'm sure there's plenty more to come over the coming weeks. And yeah, after this discussion, it just kind of is enlightening to see what's going to come out of this. And I think we'll all be keeping a close eye on it. And that's why we do these updates, because we'll keep seeing the latest trends and all that. So yeah. Once again, like usual, Stephen, thanks a lot for your time. Always good to get your knowledge. Thanks everyone for showing up. Really great to have you guys, and thanks for those questions. They were all really well informative and really good to answer. So, as usual, next week will be the same time. Week 40 now. Can't believe how quick it's going. So it should be great, but who knows? Maybe I might be the new replacement if she doesn't if that's what comes out of it. But we'll see. So it'll probably be back with you guys. And yeah, thanks everyone for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks,
Thank you.
See ya.